announced again, and an announcement will go out in the email as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so I think we're ready to turn the meeting over to Mike Martin, May's monthly program chair.
Okay.
Good morning to everybody. I'm honored to present Joel Farkas, who'll be the speaker today. He's going to essentially talk about some local history of how George Washington resided in New Jersey for a while. Joel has an excellent background in this area. He's a docent at Washington headquarters in Morristown. He's a lecturer at the Florham Institute of Lifelong Learning associated with Bailey Dickinson University and lectures on history. He's a graduate of Ohio State University. And without any further introduction, I'll just let Joel take it away, and thank you.
Good morning. I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you for having me. I think we'll just start with the video that I have up on YouTube. And then when that's done, we can talk some more. We can have some questions, and I have a little more to also talk about. So Paul, when you're ready.
Okay, here we go.
Hi everybody, I'm Joel Farkas, and I am a lecturer on the American Revolution, the Revolutionary War, the founding of our country. I'm also a volunteer docent, which is a fancy word for tour guide, at Washington's headquarters here in historic Morristown, New Jersey. Now, where I'm standing, if you walk down that way, you will come to Washington's headquarters, where George Washington actually lived for a little over 6 months during the Revolutionary War. If you go this way, you come up to the historic Morristown Green, and as you go all around here, there are a lot of different buildings and sites from events that happened during the Revolutionary War. So right behind me is the Morristown Diner. So let's go inside. I'm going to get a cup of coffee, and we'll start doing some history. As I said outside, I actually do two things in my retirement years. The first is I am a lecturer on the American Revolution, before the Revolutionary War, and after the Revolutionary War. And I'm also a volunteer docent at Washington's headquarters here in Morristown, which is just down the road that-a-way. And I have a lot of fun doing this. I've been doing it for 6 years. And some really funny things have happened, and I want to share them with you, as well as history. This is the Ford Mansion, which is one of the key buildings in what's called Washington's headquarters. Behind the Ford Mansion is called the Museum, inside of which are a large number of Revolutionary War items, George Washington-related artifacts, a fabulous video on the winter that Washington stayed here, the winter the Army called the hard winter. Everything is free, by the way. There's no charge. Now, let's go back to the Ford Mansion. This building was constructed, it was finished in 1774 by Jacob Ford Jr. So here's a picture of course, the mansion itself. Now I'm focusing in on the door. This building is about 90% original. Now it's been maintained, of course. I mean, it's wood, it has to be maintained. Look at this beautiful door. It's called a Dutch door or a split door, where the top part opens and the bottom can open or stay shut. The point is, there's a similar one in the back, and you get cross ventilation. So we're going to go inside. This is the hallway. Look at this hallway. Most of the wood here is original. Whatever the Park Service felt was unsafe, they replaced. As I said earlier, this building was constructed, it was built by Jacob Ford Jr. Jacob lived here with his wife Theodosia and 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. In 1775, in Philadelphia, we have the Second Continental Congress. During this period of time, number one, we declare independence. We don't declare war, we declare independence. Number two, Congress authorizes funds for a standing army. And number three, George Washington becomes commander-in-chief of that army. By the way, in part, large part, because of John Adams. Few people, I'm sorry to say, really know much about John Adams. I talk about him more in other lectures, but he's one of our founding fathers that really was very, very important in the founding of our country. And here's my first question. When did we declare independence? Most people say July 4th, 1776. But guess what? Most people are wrong. We declared independence on July 2nd, not July 4th. So, you ask yourself, all right, so where does July 4th come from? So let's go back a little bit. We're going to go back to June 1776. And Richard Henry Lee stands up in front of Congress. By the way, Congress back then was one house. It's not as it is today. Congress is two houses. So Richard Henry Lee stands up, and in the Lee resolutions, these United Colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. Now, a resolution is on the floor. That resolution is debated and then it's voted upon. And if that resolution passes, we have just declared independence from Britain. Now, the president of Congress was John Hancock. So in anticipation of this resolution passing, Hancock appoints a 5-man committee to draft a declaration, a written document explaining what this entire revolution is all about, this new philosophy on government and human interaction. So the 5-man committee is John Adams, there he is again, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. But the draft was mostly written by Thomas Jefferson. And so we have the debate, and on July 2nd, it passes. We declare independence. Okay, now, this draft that Jefferson was the main author of, the wording in that draft has to be debated. Some changes are made, and on July 4th, the wording is finalized. So the draft goes down the street to Dunlap printers. He immediately prints up a couple hundred of what are called broadsides. Today we kind of call them posters, to get these immediately out to the country, to Washington, to be read to the Army. It's sent overseas. And the date happens to be July 4th, so he dates it July 4th. Where was the Declaration of Independence signed? The bottom of the page. Now that was from my 10-year-old grandson, Zeke Farkas, in Boulder, Colorado. Hi, Zeke. Let me ask you another question. Declaration of Independence. What word is not in the Declaration of Independence that you'd bet your life on would be in the Declaration of Independence? How about the word independence? Zeke, thanks again, buddy. So, from the broadside, we eventually have the engrossed, as it's called, copy that we're all familiar with the signatures, etc. So let's go through the house a little bit. In the first room on the left, as you go through the house, this is what I call the war room. Washington spends as much time in this one room as any other room in this house. He's basically in here from morning till night on military business. Now, there's no major fighting in the wintertime. Back in colonial times and earlier, especially in Europe, of course, the two opposing armies would go into what's called winter quarters. They might send out small bands of men for specific purposes, but overall, they're stationary. So that's what brings Washington to Morristown, actually for the second time. But at any rate, this is the room where he and his aides conduct the military business that they need to do during the winter to get the armies ready to continue combat in the spring when they leave here. Now, as you look in this room, you look at this picture, on the back wall, you see this tall wooden, it's called a secretary, and on the left wall, you see a mirror. Now, those are two pieces of furniture that were in this room when Washington was in this room. And those two pieces of furniture are made by a cabinet maker named Chippendale, for those of you who might know antique furniture. There's about a half a dozen pieces of Chippendale furniture in this home. Now, as we go further back, this is a bedroom where The three boys slept, and there's a couple of items in this room that are really pretty funny. The first is this musket. This musket has been documented to 1744, made here in Elizabethtown, New Jersey. Today we just call it Elizabeth. And the musket is composed of three individual pieces. So you've got the barrel, right? Everybody knows what barrel is. You've got the stock, that's the wooden part that rests against your shoulder, and you've got the locking mechanism, as I call it. Those are the metal parts, the trigger and the hammer, etc., that actually fire the musket. Now, these three pieces are made in three separate locations. So they all have to come together into one location. The musket is then assembled, and then it's handed to the soldier, lock, stock, and barrel. You ever heard of that phrase? That's where it originates from. One of my favorite parts, actually in the whole home, is this. Yes, folks, the chamber pot, an early version of a toilet. So I get a lot of kids on tours, and there's this age group from maybe 8 to 13 thereabouts. And I always ask, all right, kids, who can tell me what this is? One little boy said, oh, that's an oversized Starbucks coffee cup. God, love that. So I've also been asked on tours, were there outhouses? And they were called necessaries. So in the daytime, you went outside to the necessary. At night, you used the chamber pot. Going further back into the house, we come to the kitchen area. This is a picture of the kitchen, and it is big. The kitchen doubles as a laundry room. Think about this for a second, because this is where there's hot water going all day. But the kitchen in this house is actually attached to the main house. And I've been asked on tours, weren't colonial kitchens separate for fear of fire? Well, the separate kitchen is really mostly a southern thing, and the intent was not fire, it was heat. Imagine you're in Georgia in the middle of August. The average colonial home starts at about 500 square feet. That's the entire home, by the way. And you're going to have a fire in that home to cook your meals. Imagine how extra hot it is with that fire going. So that's really where the idea of a separate kitchen comes from. Opposite the kitchen is Theodosia's bedroom, where she and her daughter Elizabeth slept. Now, as you look at this picture, straight in a little bit to the right, you see this gold-colored wing chair. And to the right of it on that stand is what's called a fire screen. Those are two more pieces of furniture, plus a chair at the table with a plaque. You can see it. Those three pieces were in that home when Washington was also in that home. Now, the fire screen serves the purpose of keeping heat off your face when you're in front of a working fire. And I've asked people, it's because it's kind of fun, anybody tell me what the fire screen is for? And a number of people have told me, well, that's to keep the wax makeup that women wore from melting. Well, folks, I hate to tell you this, but colonial women did not wear wax makeup. In fact, colonial women pretty much wore no makeup. So there are a lot of these myths or legends or whatever terms you want to use, and we're gonna talk about a few more as we go through this afternoon. So we go up a few steps and we come to the servants area. And here you see two bedrooms. And in these bedrooms, you actually see beds. Now you say, what's the big deal about a bed? Well, in colonial times, the average person did not have a bed. First of all, your home's too small. The average couple had between 7 and 10 children, which I'm going to get back to in a second because it's pretty interesting. So where are you going to put up an actual structure? All beds were made individually, one at a time, to fit the person. Custom beds. Who knew, right? So these two beds happen to have been a gift to the Park Service. They didn't know where to put them. They put them in here. In reality, most people slept on mattresses. So you can see mattresses on the floor here. And these mattresses were generally filled with hay. So go outside, grab some hay, put it in the mattress, go to bed. At night, you'd lay your mattress down. You would then hit your mattress with a stick to get the bugs out. Now, some of you may remember an expression, when you go to bed, it's time to hit the hay. That's where this expression comes from. Now, children, families. The average couple had between 7 and 10 children. Now, not all survived. Unfortunately, mortality rates were quite high. So that got me interested one day, just how big were families? So I just picked some names to see how large their families were. So Martha Washington was one of 8 children. So in our world today, it's already getting up there. Betsy Ross of the flag, by the way, hate to tell you this, she did not create our first flag. Betsy Ross was one of 17 children. We go upstairs again to the top level. When Washington comes to the Ford Mansion, he brings with him 18 servants. Besides Washington's 18 servants, he comes with 5 aides de camp. Now, an aide de camp in our world today would be like an executive assistant. And the best known of those 5 was Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton spends the entire time here with Washington. Now, while he's here, he's courting Betsy Schuyler, and the home where Betsy spent that winter is just about across the street from where I'm sitting right now. And in the end of June, and at the end of 1780, she and Alexander Hamilton marry. They then wrote a Broadway play, and they made millions of dollars. All right, just kidding. Which brings us to George Washington's bedroom. As you look at this picture, you see the bed. This bed, again, all made by hand. This bed is 6 feet 4 inches long. So the furniture in this room, especially on the left, you see that beautiful bureau or chest of drawers. That's original to that room. Washington probably kept his clothing in there. You see a mirror on the back left wall, again, original to that room. And look on the right, you see, we call it a dressing table. That dressing table was brought upstairs for Martha to use because Martha stayed with George at the Ford Mansion. Now, Martha, all 8 winters of the war lasted 8 winters. All 8 winters, wherever her husband was, that's where Martha went. So she comes to the Ford Mansion. And interesting story about Martha, because a lot of people really, when you say Martha Washington, this is the image that they think of. Martha's maiden name was Dandridge. At the age of 18, she marries Daniel Custis. Custis' family was a very wealthy, prominent Virginia family. In 7 years, they had 4 children. I say 7 years because, unfortunately, Daniel dies after 7 years. And in 1750, this is 1757. This is a painting, a drawing of Martha in 1757. And 2 years later, she marries George. Now, when Martha marries George, 2 of her 4 children had already died. The 2 children, there was a boy and a girl. The boy grows up, he marries, and he has 4 children. And one of those 4 was a boy named George Washington Parke Custis. He grows up, and he has a daughter, and his daughter marries Robert E. Lee. If you've ever gone to Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C., which ironically I'm going to be in next weekend, you go look on top of the hill, you'll see this mansion. A lot of people still call it the Custis Lee Mansion, and that's the background. Talking about George Washington, there is a myth that he never slept in a bed because he could never find a bed long enough for a 6'2" frame. It is not true. As I just said earlier, all beds were custom made. George Washington never had children of his own. I'm asked that a lot. No one really knows why not for sure, but he never had children of his own. Washington leaves the Ford Mansion in June of 1780, goes after the British. 1781 is the Battle of Yorktown. That's the last major battle of the war. Washington's army defeats Cornwallis with the help of the French. Most historians, maybe even every historian, agrees without the French, we'd have lost the war. We were running out of everything. We needed, especially a navy. But France agreed finally to help us. The King of France was Louis XVI. Who was his wife? Marie Antoinette, the one French queen that nobody remembers except her name. What did she say that people remember? Let him eat cake, right? You're all out there going, yeah, that's what she said. Well, guess what? No. There is no proof she ever uttered those words. 1783, the Treaty of Paris, the war is over. Washington goes home to Mount Vernon. 6 years later, he gets summoned back to New York. New York's the temporary capital at the time. to be sworn in as our first president. He serves 2 terms. He declines to run for a 3rd term. There were a lot of political reasons involved, but basically 2 terms is enough. And that 2 terms becomes tradition for 150 years. It doesn't become law until the 22nd Amendment of 1947. And even then, it's still 2 terms. It's probably just as well, though, because unfortunately, Washington dies 2 years later in 1799. How did Washington die? A lot of people know, and on my tours when I ask this, well, he was sick, he had pneumonia or whatever, and okay, it's kind of on the right track. Washington, in December of 1799, it's a snowy, sleety, rainy, miserable day. He's out all day in Mount Vernon. He comes home, his clothes are soaked, he's not feeling great, but all right. Gets up the next morning, goes out again in the same weather. Now he comes home and he's just not feeling well. He's having trouble talking, he's having trouble breathing, he's having trouble swallowing, he goes to bed, and it gets worse, and it gets worse, and it gets worse. Eventually, 3 doctors come in. From the doctor's notes, doctors today say Washington contracted acute bacterial epiglottitis. Now, your epiglottis is this little flap in your throat. It's really quite tiny. And the function of it is when you swallow, this epiglottis closes over your windpipe so food will not go into your lungs. Instead, food will go into your stomach. So Washington's epiglottis became infected. The infection caused his epiglottis to swell. It swelled over his windpipe and he suffocated to death. Technically, that's how he died. Let's talk about a couple more fun things about George Washington, one of which is his teeth. What were George Washington's false teeth made out of? Yes, all those of you who are saying, yes, it's wood. Never, ever happened. Not wood, not even once. Washington started losing his teeth kind of one at a time in his mid-20s. Again, no one's really sure why. During his presidency, especially his 2nd term, he had no original teeth left. Now, his false teeth, let me show you a picture here. This is the set that's at Mount Vernon. He found a dentist who would make false teeth for him. Now, this was brand new stuff, by the way. You know, today we have implants and crowns and all this stuff. Back then, there was nothing like that. So this dentist makes a set of false teeth. He puts it in George's mouth. Washington opens his mouth, but the teeth just kind of sat there. The dentist was a cool guy. Goes back, he comes back again, and he puts the teeth in George Washington's mouth. Washington opens his mouth, and the teeth open. What did the dentist do? Look at this picture. He put springs, this is an actual set, by the way. He put springs where the upper and lower jaws meet. Can you imagine this in your mouth? Not a lot of fun. I'm going to close this out by talking about the cherry tree. What's the story with the cherry tree? Well, it all starts with this man, Mason Locke Weems. They called him Parson Weems. And after George Washington died in the early 1800s, Parson Weems writes this little booklet, and each chapter is one of George Washington's virtues. And the idea is for younger readers to read it and to try to emulate George Washington. And one of the chapters is about honesty. Father, I cut down the cherry tree, I cannot tell a lie. Now, this is the artist Grant Wood. Some of you may know this name, but you'll probably be familiar with his most famous work of art, American Gothic, right? Now, Grant Wood also did a painting called Parson Weems' Fable. Now, this is Grant Wood's Parson Weems. You can see him there on the right. Now, follow his hand and his finger, and they're pointing to George Washington holding the axe. Now, let's take a look at George Washington, because here you see the artist Gilbert Stuart's 66-year-old head on a 6-year-old body. So what is Grant Wood trying to say? Well, in my opinion, he's trying to say George Washington is timeless, George Washington is ageless, and George Washington orders you to attend my next lecture. So on behalf of myself, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're back.
Muted. Oh, I just got unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So that was one of the videos I have up on YouTube. Obviously, I'm not doing any lectures right now. I'm going to try to do this for those of you who want to look at what I've done. I hope you can read this. If you go on YouTube and you do a search, type in Revolutionary War Morristown, and you'll see those two images. The video you just saw is the top one. The one underneath it, it runs 58 minutes, and that's an actual walking, driving tour of historic Morristown. I go around the green, I go to the Presbyterian Church Cemetery, go to the Schuyler Hamilton House, go out to Jockey Hollow. I go by Burnham Park. Does anybody know where Burnham Park is and the statue that's in Burnham Park? There's a huge amount of Revolutionary War artifacts and markers and so on and so forth. At any rate, if you type in those three words, you'll see the videos. So please enjoy yourself. Eventually, I hope to have up there more. So what I thought I would, well, first of all, let me go back first. There we go. Anybody have any questions or anything I can answer for anybody or try to answer?
Bill, are you wanting to?
Yes, I do. I raised my hand. I know the ropes are on here, so I always get in front. Thanks a lot for an enjoyable lecture. So my question is, you told us that the screen in front of the fireplace was not for melting wax ladies' makeup, but what was it for?
Heat.
Yeah.
It just keeps heat off of a person's face. The clothes, of course, protect the rest of the body, and that just protects the face. And that was really simply, that was it.
Thanks.
No problem. Anybody else?
Nolan Ash.
Guilty. First of all, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. The American Revolutionary Roundtable could not exist without having their meetings with you at Washington's headquarters. So that's number one, big thank you. Number two, big thank you is from the Alexander Hamilton Awareness Society I'm very involved with. And we have a lot of meetings also with you. So super kudos to you guys. One kind of technical question you didn't talk on, it always had my curiosity. You go to the Battle of Springfield, which is a major battle where they were trying to get to Morristown. The thing that gets me going is they had 6,000 troops on their way to Springfield, at least according to Wikipedia. If you can believe Wikipedia, I guess that's a big if. They were repulsed with 25 dead, only 25 dead. When I look at statistics about Revolutionary War battles in general, I'm shocked at how few people die relative to the number of troops involved. Maybe because the muskets are very poor, or I don't know. I'm throwing you in a different direction kind of on the fly. But I've always been puzzled by that.
Well, let me take the second part first. The Battle of Bunker Hill was probably the bloodiest battle from a percentage-wise. When you look at the number of troops involved and the number of casualties, again, in a percentage-wise. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Percentage-wise. So, yeah, the numbers that we're used to today are way, way, way beyond what they were back then. Now, the battles of Springfield and what's called Connecticut Farms. Now, Connecticut Farms is today Union, so it's not the state of Connecticut. So Washington this is in 1780. It's either May or June. Washington is still at Jockey Hollow, and the British get word that Washington's army is in disarray and morale is low, and it would be easy pickings to attack them. So the British send up troops through, first I think it was Connecticut Farms, and they're not, and they do this. This is going to be a surprise, except spies, both sides had spies. And anyway, Washington spies find out what the British are up to. So when they get to, I think it's Connecticut Farms first, they're not, the militia are waiting for the British. And the British are just so surprised and stunned that their plans have been found out. And hence, since the surprise is no longer a surprise, the British eventually are successful in capturing the town, but the surprise part is lost in terms of their being able to attack and hopefully destroy Washington's army. So in reprisal, they burned Connecticut Farms to the ground. They go back. I think they were stationed on Staten Island at the time. They try a second time. This time they get as far as Springfield. Again, the warning system. By the way, in Summit, Beacon Hill, that was part of the warning system. And again, they are met with just fierce resistance that they're not expecting. And they say, you know what, enough. And those were actually the last two battles in New Jersey. So in a short synopsis, that's the story with that.
Just for everybody to realize, if you want to ask a question, you raise your hand using the button in the participant window. Okay, next is Bob Miller. Oops, there, okay.
I'm unmuted, I can see it.
Yep.
Yes,
All right, you know, very interesting, entertaining. But I've got a question. You see lots of plaques and lots of people claiming that Washington slept here. Other than the Ford Mansion in Morristown, how many different places in New Jersey did he actually use as a winter headquarters? And where were they?
He used Morristown actually twice. He used Middlebrook, which is what's no longer, I don't think it's called Middlebrook anymore today. It's around Raritan and that area. So he wintered there also. Washington wintered, by the way, he slept in the Dye Mansion in Wayne, which is not that far from Washington's headquarters. Don't forget, the war lasted 8 years, right? He had to sleep somewhere for 8 years.
Yeah.
Oh. So I know it's a funny saying, he slept around, but so there's the answer as best as I know, at least.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mordo Shea.
Hi, great presentation.
Thank you.
How many soldiers were in Washington's army during the hard winter?
I want to say 2,000 to 3,000. He comes back from, well, 2,000 to 3,000. We'll leave it go at that. If you've never been to Jockey Hollow, what they have there today in Jockey Hollow, where the bulk of Washington's army spent the winter, are reconstructed cabins. But the visitor center there has a great story to tell. And there's a video both at the visitor center at Jockey Hollow and at Washington's headquarters about the soldier's life that winter in Jockey Hollow. Valley Forge gets a lot of press. They have a better PR department, I think. But just in terms of weather, that winter that the Army called the hard winter, that was the coldest winter on record, I think to this day. It was so cold, New York Harbor was actually frozen. They measured the ice, they said it was 18 feet thick. And all the major waterways down to the Carolinas on the East Coast were literally frozen solid. So kind of a fun story. Well, it isn't a story, it's fact. So Washington is in Morristown, right? And the British know he's there. And they say, hey, we can literally walk across New York Harbor. And they do. They come up with this plan to try to kidnap George Washington. So they walk, and they had horses also. They go across, they do some diversionary things. But the main thrust was to get to Morristown undetected to try to kidnap George Washington. Well, they They reassemble in Hackensack. At this point in time, the snow drifts are 6 to 8 feet deep. There were 27 or 28 major snowstorms. So they're now ready to go to Morristown. They can't find Morristown. They literally cannot. You know, there aren't road signs. I don't think any of them had Apple iPhones with the GPS or something. They can't find Morristown. And some of the soldiers are literally getting frostbite. So they walk back over the harbor to Staten Island. So kind of a side story. The weather gave the British an opportunity, but at the same time, it denied the British the opportunity.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else, can I leave you guys with something? It'll take about 3 minutes.
Sure.
Okay.
I want to, let me reverse this because I'm going to do this from my phone. Can you read what's on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm going to hold my iPad this way. So Mark Twain once said, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So how do we remember the American Revolution? The truth, a good story, don't remember much at all. So I'm going to take one thing that I just have a lot of fun talking about. So this is a map of North America, circa 1753, which is the period I'm starting at. And you see that area in the middle, it's a disputed area. It's called the Forks of the Ohio. Both France and England claim that. So the colony of Virginia gets word that the French are building fortifications there, and Virginia sends some of their militia to tell the French to leave. So I wanted to define militia. Militia are amateur citizen soldiers, poorly trained, poorly equipped. And this band of militia is led by a 21-year-old Major George Washington. He gets there, French say, sorry, we're not leaving. Washington returns to Virginia. The next year he goes back. Now there's a firefight. Men are killed. And this is the beginning of what we call the French and Indian War. Well, Britain sends over an army under a General Braddock. And this is where a problem starts. You see, we got these highly trained, beautifully equipped, the most successful military force in the world, the British, and they have to fight alongside the militia. Well, the British have nothing but contempt and disdain for the militia, and they ridicule the militia mercilessly. And how do they ridicule them? They do it with a song called Yankee Doodle. Now, guys, I hope you're unmuted. On the count of 3, I want you all to sing Yankee Doodle. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Yankee
Doodle came to town.
On a pony, a feather in his cap,
And now it's pony.
Yankee Doodle, keep it up. Yankee Doodle, dandy.
Okay. What great
If the
enthusiasm.
girls be handy.
Isn't it amazing? When was the last time you guys sang that song? Whoops. Yeah. When was the last time you guys sang that song? 20 years ago? 40 years ago? Isn't it amazing how the melody comes right back to you? And in most cases, so do words. Now,
Hey, Joel, we're not hearing you.
Lost your, Joel, we lost your sound.
It says he's unmuted.
Joel, we can't hear you right now. And you don't appear to be muted. Mark, can we hear you? Let me try to unmute them all.
Oh, okay. Hear me now? There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I had to unmute all, which means we're getting a lot of background sound. Hold on just a second.
Ja, wir machen die dritte Seite. Okay, okay, Andy. How are you feeling? Not so good?
Hold on.
Pandemonium.
Okay, I muted everybody.
Can you-
I'm muting Joel.
All right, are we good now?
Yes.
Okay, so what's a Yankee? I know you're going to say a baseball player. A Yankee was a derogatory term used by the British against the colonists. And what's a doodle? So a doodle is a simpleton. So if you think about it, you have kind of a double negative. Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony. Couldn't even ride a horse. You know? What
Lost your audio again, Joel.
have to do with that? I hear.
You seem to be coming in and out, Joel.
Can you hear me?
Now we do.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we hear you now.
All right. So, what does pasta have to do with anything? Well, in colonial times, if you were the height of Italian fashion, you were called a macaroni. So now what the song is saying is, look at these militia. They are so dumb. They think that by wearing a feather in their hat, it makes them the height of fashion. And that's what that song means. So of course, the song eventually becomes a patriotic song. And I just think it's a great story. And in all probability, somewhere tomorrow morning, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, some of you are going to wake up with this song bouncing around in your head. So I'll apologize now. But in the meantime, thank you for having me.
This is Mitch Erickson. I think we have some more questions, and I have one. And since I'm a
by all
co-host,
means,
I can't raise a blue hand, so I'm just going to ask it. Fast forward to about 15, 20 years ago, and Bruce Springsteen sang a song called "Born in the USA," which is an anti-Vietnam song. And every 4th of July, every radio station plays that like it's some patriotic song, just kind of like the Yankee Doodle song. It's just kind of an interesting, 200 years later and the same misappropriation of a song. Let's see. Go ahead, Mark. You can run the microphones now.
Anybody else?
Okay. Ron Hoke has a question.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a very interesting talk. Could you tell us
Thank
a little bit more about the winter, the hard winter, in terms of their ability to survive the winter, to find food? Were there problems with people starving or freezing? What was the mortality rate? How about disease and so forth? And how did it compare to Valley Forge?
Valley Forge had a higher mortality rate than Jockey Hollow, main reason being health, disease. At Jockey Hollow, at Valley Forge, and up to Valley Forge. So when the army itself started to form up in Boston in 1775, and you had all these various groups. And one of the issues was whenever they decided to relieve themselves, they just did it wherever they happened to have been. Well, you can imagine how unsanitary that was. That leads to dysentery and typhus and a whole host of diseases. And that was every camp. So we come to Valley Forge, and it's the same problem until Baron von Steuben shows up. If you don't know the story about him, he was a Prussian-trained officer. He befriends, I think it was Ben Franklin, who writes a letter of recommendation that von Steuben brings. We needed European officers in our army. So we had men in Europe trying to recruit them. Well, at any rate, von Steuben makes his way to Valley Forge, and he didn't speak English. It said he could curse in 8 languages, but he didn't speak English. At any rate, he does 2 things. He trains the army, but he also starts sanitary conditions. And this made a huge difference. So now fast forward to Jockey Hollow, and these sanitary conditions are now in force, and they cut down on the number of deaths caused by disease. So this is very, very important. The weather itself was horrible. To tell you the truth, how the soldiers survived, it was not easy. There was always a shortage of food, but somehow, and the number of deaths, the number of deaths at Valley Forge more than doubled. I think Morristown was about 1,000 total. I think Valley Forge was more than double that. I'm guessing at the numbers because I haven't looked at this recently. But it was Washington. You know, Washington militarily was not the greatest tactician, but he was able to keep the army together, a combination of various things. But he kept the men together, and he got them through that horrible winter in Morristown. It was a hard winter, without question.
Thank you.
Roger Burns has a question.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, a little local trivia. I'm a resident of New Providence, as some of us are, and it's where we have our meetings. Local trivia says that in town we have a brook, which is today named Salt Brook, and runs right through the center of town, and we have a grammar school named Salt Brook School. A story I heard, which I believe is true, is during the war, the local militia, who were basically farmers in the area, were alerted that the British were heading our way, perhaps through Summit or up through Springfield, I'm not sure. But locals were far outnumbered, and the British decided to set up an encampment in what is today New Providence, back then called Turkey. Anyway, what the militia did in order to deal with it was they dumped sacks of salt in the brook upstream from where the British had set up camp. And of course, the British needed the water and basically packed up and left town.
I love it.
So there's more than one way to win a war.
That's fabulous. Thank you.
Okay. In fact, that's on the town seal. If you see it, you'll see the Presbyterian church, and you'll see the little brook winding across the map of the town.
Fabulous. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tom Pate has a question. Tom Pate.
Yes, here we go. You mentioned that Valley Forge has a better PR department than Morristown does. And that's why everyone knows about Valley Forge, but most people don't recognize the importance of Morristown and the encampments here. Is there any other reason? And do you think that that's possible to alter that dynamic going forward?
Well, I know the National Park Service, where I'm at, would love to have more people come by. Would love to have, as you said, the name recognition more in Morristown than it is. But I don't know if there's really an answer to that. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Valley Forge. Some important things happen there, as happened every winter. But the perception by most people is that the weather at Valley Forge was the worst of the war. And of course, that just isn't true. But it's going to take people who like history, like you guys, to maybe spread the word a little bit and to show how interesting Morristown really is, and New Jersey. So.
Al Aho has a question.
Yes, Joel, a great talk. I really loved the video. I often wondered, who is the Morris that Morristown is named after?
He was Lewis Morris. There's a Lewis Morris Park in Morristown. He was an early governor. Wait a minute. Yes, he was an early governor of New Jersey. It's not named after Robert Morris, the financier of the Revolution. It was called, it was Lewis Morris.
Thank you.
I don't have any more questions or no more raised hands. If somebody has a question, please use the raise hand flag. Otherwise, it's back to you, Mike.
Okay, Joel, on behalf of the Old Guard, I just want to say thank you for a very entertaining talk about the history, the local history, George Washington's residency, and the like. We normally give spokesman a certificate, but obviously that's not possible. But nonetheless, we'll be taking you out. I'll be taking you out to lunch and when this thing is over. But let me just turn it over to Mark to give what we would call an Old Guard salute to essentially thank you for a very, very interesting talk. So if we can clap and you can unmute everybody, thank you.
Local delicious. Extreme.